Great. I think we'll kick off for today. So welcome, everybody. So I'm Edward, Employer Engagement Lead at the Social Mobility Commission, and welcome to today's Social Mobility Masterclass of webinars for employers. So today's session is going to focusing on apprenticeships and the role employers can play in strengthening social mobility through your apprenticeship program. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. So if you do have any questions for myself or any of the panelists, please pop them in the question box throughout the session and presentations, and we will endeavour to answer your questions at the Q&A session at the end. So just a quick note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on our YouTube channel after today's live event. The slides have also been sent in a link now, which you can click on and look at. If we just move on to the first slide. So today we're going to explore how apprenticeships fit into social mobility. So employers and training providers rely on apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship schemes to provide new opportunities, upskill people from both inside and outside their organisation, and they help contribute to more innovative, inclusive workplaces. Today we were going to consider a few of the actions from our apprenticeship toolkit that we advocate and recommend that all employers and training providers can implement to improve socioeconomic diversity of their apprenticeship programme. So I'm pleased to say that I'm joined today by Erica Holt-White, who's from the Sutton Trust. So she'll be sharing the findings from their recent report, which looks at how young people are accessing apprenticeships, as well as tips on outreach for employers, and that employers should undertake to encourage more young people to take up apprenticeships. I'm also pleased to say that we're also joined by Sharon Blyfield, who's the head of early careers and apprenticeships at Coca-Cola Euro Pacific Partners. So she'll be sharing some of the initiatives that CSEP has undertaken to ensure that through traditional and non-traditional recruitment methods that they've increased representation to support their social mobility pledge. We'll also be having a Q&A session at the end, so please do put any questions in that you have for any of the panelists. So if we move on to the next slide, so just a quick recap on what is social mobility. So social mobility is about ensuring that a person's occupation and income is not tied to where they started in life, and ensuring that people of all backgrounds have equal opportunities. So put it simply, it's about fairness and ensuring that everybody has the chance to succeed regardless of what their parents did or where in the country they grew up or any other social characteristic. Broadly speaking, there are two types of social mobility. That's relative social mobility. So that's about ensuring that people have the opportunity through hard work and talent to improve their own personal situation compared to that of their parents, and absolute social mobility. That's about ensuring that overall each generation has better living standards than the next. So the actions we'll discuss today will consider how employers can take steps in supporting socioeconomic inclusion within your own organisations and social mobility generally through your apprenticeship programme. If we just look at the next slide, now we can take a look at how apprenticeships fit into social mobility. So just to start by mentioning that our research does show that the majority of apprentices are not from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So perhaps this might be obvious to some, but maybe not as obvious to others. But policymakers and employers alike often talk of apprenticeships as being by default a social mobility tool helping the disadvantaged. But this is not necessarily the case. So having said that, if apprenticeship programs are targeted, apprenticeships are one of the most effective tools of social mobility, and an effective mechanism employers have to build diverse and talented workforce. So I'm sure you're all aware that there's now a mountain of evidence that confirms the benefits that apprenticeships confer on workplace learners, such as enhanced career earnings, continued education, and richer, more fulfilled working lives. They also play their part in closing the class pay gap, while also providing people the chance to earn while they learn. So a crucial aspect for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. If we just pop the slide through just to reveal some of the points. Yeah, so they also offer a non-degree route to higher skills, and if targeted, can provide a pathway for social mobility that is not that is an alternative to a 3-year residential degree, which is usually associated with strong social mobility outcomes. So what's the current landscape of apprenticeships? So as part of our research program in 2020, we did publish a report on apprenticeships and social mobility. So the report showed that as it currently stands, the apprenticeship system in general does need to do more to meet its promise for social mobility. The report found that since the apprenticeship levy was introduced in 2017, it has funded a higher proportion of higher level apprenticeships, which are then more likely to be taken by learners from more privileged backgrounds than people from disadvantaged backgrounds who would ultimately benefit more from apprenticeships. So following the levy's introduction, there was a large fall in the number of starts, with the worst off learners bearing the brunt of this. So we also know that this trend continued with the pandemic impacting the number of starts, which has likely then impacted the number of starts from the worst off learners bearing the brunt of this. If we just move on to the next slide. So in response to the report, so employers asked us what they should do to support social mobility through their apprenticeship programs. So last year, as part of our employers program, we published a toolkit aimed at giving practical advice and tips to employers and training providers on what they can do to ensure their apprenticeship program is supporting social mobility. So the toolkit was designed as a roadmap for anybody working in apprenticeships who is committed to improving socioeconomic diversity and inclusion within their workforce. So it includes recommendations on data collection, hiring, practices, outreach, progression, and it also includes real-life case studies on best practice example and guidance on how to ensure equal access to quality apprenticeship programs for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. If we just have a look at the next slide, we can take a look at some of the key actions from the toolkit that we advocate and recommend that all employers and training providers can implement to improve socioeconomic diversity of their apprenticeship program. I'll just start off by going into data. So this is quite a key point, and we advocate for this across the whole piece, and not just apprenticeships, but also the wider workforce. So when considering the socioeconomic diversity, it is imperative that employers develop better data sets on socioeconomic diversity, and ones that are equivalent to what's currently available for other diversity characteristics. So for example, training providers and employers measuring socioeconomic background, it kind of helps them to know what needs to be done in order to improve socioeconomic diversity and inclusion within that organization. But we do know it's not always a straightforward process. So socioeconomic diversity data is not as embedded into organizational thinking as other diversity characteristics. So the key question that we recommend to ascertain socioeconomic background of an employee is, what is the occupation of your main household earner when you were age 14? So we recommend using this question as it's the best and most accurate measure to assess someone's socioeconomic background. It's also the easiest to understand for the employee, and it also gets the highest response rates in testing. Looking at some more things on this slide, so outreach. So outreach is really key to this whole piece of who you're engaging with. So employers should look at outreach programs to recruit apprentices who are not currently in your network. So rather than expecting them to come to you, do your research and partner with organisations relevant to your organisation. So we recommend that you develop a clear picture of who you want to reach and how this relates to your organisation's goals. Think about their backgrounds, experiences, locations, and anything they could bring to your organisation. For example, you could provide outreach programs in schools or further education colleges that will encourage individuals to consider apprenticeship programs, not only in your own organisation, but also in your wider sector. Now looking at another on this slide is support and the culture within organisations, and thinking about ways to support your apprenticeships through your programs. So think about providing a range of contact points for apprenticeships across different levels of your organisation. So for example, through staff networks, mentoring programs or buddy schemes. So there might be questions that apprenticeships would rather ask a peer than a senior manager. And just think about how your organisation can create a system of support around your apprentices that can offer guidance, support, and knowledge. So another thing we advocate for is educating and training managers on offering pastoral support to apprenticeships, particularly where there's people who have complex additional needs that some apprentices may have. The other thing we suggest is support and resource an apprentice network, and link it to other staff networks. So this might be something that's easier for larger organisations, but smaller employers or training providers could signpost to existing external apprenticeship networks. Now looking at progression and how to progress your apprentices. So one thing we recommend is developing progression pathways. So whether that's to a higher level apprenticeship or a job in another job in the organisation or wider industry, be active in enabling apprenticeships to achieve their career goals and apply the skills that they've learned. So for example, design progression pathways. You could build a pipeline for apprenticeships from level 2 upwards. The other thing we recommend is talking with your apprentices about their next steps. So don't just leave this to the last minute. Start the conversations early and have regular check-ins with their line manager from early on in their apprenticeship program to figure out what the apprentice's next steps will be, whether that's another role in your organisation or another level apprenticeship or another role in your wider industry. So that was just a few of the an overview of some of the actions that we recommend all employers should take when designing apprenticeship programs. So we do encourage all employers to take a look at the toolkit. It's got more detail. It goes into depth on all of the individual actions. So if you need more advice on particular aspects, so if it's outreach or progression or hiring, do take a look at that guidance, which is available on our website. So yes, as I said earlier, I'm really pleased to be joined by Erica Holt-White today, who's from the Sutton Trust. So she's going to be sharing her findings from their apprenticeship outreach report and with some tips on best practice for employers on how to undertake outreach. So I'll hand over to Erica.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica from the Sutton Trust, and thank you to everyone at the SMC for the invitation to speak to you today. So as Edward said, I'm going to be discussing the findings of our apprenticeship outreach report that we published at the end of last year. So on the next slide, I've just put in a kind of introduction to the Sutton Trust for those that aren't familiar. So we're a social mobility organisation that has run for the past 25 years, supporting young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to accessing leading universities and careers, and more recently, accessing top apprenticeship opportunities. We have our programmes arm that runs apprenticeship summer schools, as well as careers programmes and university summer schools. And then our research arm that identifies the causes of low social mobility and promotes the effective solutions through education and employment. And our research arm covers the 5 policy areas on the slide, from the early years to schools and apprenticeships. So the next slide discusses the kind of aim of our report. So our previous research had found that there was an access gap, particularly for degree level apprenticeships, and we saw that these access problems kind of reflected what was seen at university level, and we wanted to understand a bit more about that. And we think that it's important to increase both the demand among young people for these roles, as well as the work of employers to change to reach young people to access these really important opportunities for social mobility. And to do this, we use kind of 2 research areas. So firstly, we held a series of interviews with apprenticeship providers, so some employers and some universities that were involved with degree apprenticeships, and also some kind of outreach organisations. And then the second was a series of polling of apprentices, and that was through YouGov. On the next slide. So yes, firstly, I will talk about the findings from our interviews with the employers, universities and outreach organisations. So we asked them about why they really think apprenticeships are important to their organisation, and people told us that they were really important to gain a way to diversify their workforce. And a lot of interviewees thought that outreach was a really important method of widening that talent pool to not just apprenticeships, but their organisation as a whole. They thought that partnerships with other organisations were really important to reach the largest numbers of young people, and also organisations that had a specific specialism in reaching to particular disadvantaged groups, but some did say that there were challenges in doing so, particularly to kind of reach those really hard to reach groups. They also said that there was still a disconnect between the employer experience of outreach activities and the school experience. Some interviewees told us it was quite difficult to maintain relationships with the school, and particularly it was hard to kind of find a good timing schedule compared to perhaps universities and their outreach programs. They have a more kind of structured schedule across the academic year, but employers were finding that hard to kind of match employer recruitment with the school calendar. And then on degree apprenticeships specifically, we asked about who should hold the responsibility for outreach, and we found that there were definitely different views, kind of reflecting the importance of involving not only employers but also university partners. On the next slide, we've got some more findings from the interviews. So we were able to ask questions about spending on outreach, and whilst some employers were perhaps reluctant to kind of go into detail on how much they were spending, what we concluded was that spending on outreach for apprenticeships was low compared to that spent on graduate outreach and the cost of recruitment. We also asked specifically about spending of the apprenticeship levy, and a lot of people were saying that they wanted to kind of see more flexibility in how that could be spent. But again, there was not really a consensus on what this could be spent on. There are a lot of wide-ranging ideas. Some of those ideas were spending money specifically on access and outreach activities. Also, because of the nature of outreach over the past couple of years, because of the pandemic, a lot of people were pointing out virtual outreach programs and the successes as well as problems that arose with those. Particularly as a kind of success, it allowed organisations to reach more harder to reach kind of disadvantaged students and widen their kind of geographical reach. But then others did report that there was virtual fatigue seen and low turnouts for some events. Also, one thing that was pointed out that people wanted to see more of was more identification and sharing of the best practice of outreach activities. And some mentioned that this could not just be on apprenticeships, but also learning from successful university outreach programs. And then on the next slide, we'll move on to the findings from our polling. So to gain a representative sample of apprentices, we asked those currently involved in an apprenticeship, or as well as those that had completed an apprenticeship over the past 3 years. So these are some of the key findings that we found. So 1 in 4 young apprentices said that the application process for apprenticeships was difficult to navigate. We also found that 68% of apprentices that were aged between 25 and 54 said that they were already working for their employer before they started doing their apprenticeship. And then moving to the young people again for this third point, 14% of young apprentices said that they hadn't received any information before they actually began their apprenticeship. So the next slides have got some of our key findings charts. Some of these are for apprentices of all ages, and then some are specifically for those aged 16 to 24. So this one is for those between 16 and 54 and looks at those that said they didn't get any information before their apprenticeship and what they would have liked to have known. So the top responses there were they wanted information on the balance between work and study life, more information on what careers an apprenticeship could lead to, more information on the apprenticeship experience, and salary information was also important. On their next slide, this is looking at young people specifically to look at the main reasons why they were choosing apprenticeships. So a range of responses. So these were a set range of responses that people could choose from. But for this one, as you can see, the responses ranged from 14% to about 4%, so less variability compared to some of our other questions. So the top ones there, people were looking for a job and it seemed like a good option to do an apprenticeship and they wanted to get into work whilst learning. But then some people also kind of put off by the university costs as well as wanting to have money whilst they were studying. The next slide has another chart. So this is looking at the views of young apprentices again and thinking about they did an apprenticeship. So what do they think would have influenced some more of their friends and classmates to have maybe chosen an apprenticeship as well? So a key factor that they said was that there would better understanding was needed of the benefits of an apprenticeship compared to university. And a large group saying that better support was needed from their school. Another reason picking up on the pay that apprentices get and also the support received from friends and family. The next slide has another chart again from young people, and we asked them if their friends and family were supportive of their decision to take up an apprenticeship. And whilst it was good to see the majority were supportive, there was still around a quarter that were either somewhat or very unsupportive of this. And the sample size allowed us to kind of compare those from a more working class background to a more privileged background. And we did see that those from working class backgrounds were less likely to have supportive friends and family. And whilst we can't be certain of the reasons behind this, looking at existing kind of research on this area as well, it's likely that this is related to kind of concerns about taking up an apprenticeship and what that means for your future and what it means for earnings. So the next slides have some tips that we've written based on our research findings for employers about running effective apprenticeship outreach programs. So firstly, to recognise that time, capacity and resource is required to deliver the most effective outreach programs. The second recognises the importance of work experience. So in our report, we've been able to highlight some great case studies of apprenticeship outreach, and also from speaking to providers themselves, they were able to tell us that young people were really gaining value from that work experience placement, and that these should, where possible, return to pre-pandemic levels. And as well as this, kind of reflecting on what's gone well in the pandemic, where possible, to carry on some online provisions as well. So the most useful information that we've also kind of pointed out to deliver to apprentices before they start includes salary information, information on the careers apprentices can get, grade requirements, more information about the work-life balance, and information for the application process. The next slide has a few more tips. So firstly, to partner with others where needed, as this can really be helpful to achieve the scale that you want, and as well as reach target groups via organisations that have got experience in reaching those groups. Also, to kind of a big part of really effective outreach that we'd seen, that employers told us that their kind of evaluation seen that young people really enjoy and find value in hearing from apprentices themselves, in particular apprentices that are from a particular background or social group that can show their experience and can be relatable, so young people can see themselves reflected in an apprentice and feel like it's an option for them. To pick up on kind of financial constraints, we think it's really important to support those not just when they start an apprenticeship, but also with the costs of outreach programs. So whether that's travel costs or any equipment, as this is seen, and from some of our other work as well, that this could be a barrier for young people to take up an apprenticeship. And one thing that we found that was really important from our interviews with partners was that partnerships between teachers and parents, not just reaching out to young people, is really important. So to do this, again, a really good way is to work with kind of partner organisations that have done this before, and to get into those groups that really do influence young people's decisions. So not just their teachers, but also their family and parents. And some final ones on the next slide. So we've also done a report recently on careers guidance, which also picks up on kind of apprenticeship information. And we've identified there and in this report about reaching out to those even from a younger age, so they can pick their education options that will allow them to access apprenticeships, and also kind of gain an interest from a young age, so they can kind of, develop what they choose to be able to access an apprenticeship when the time comes, and they can make an informed decision about their future. Also, we've pointed out to identify the best time to work with schools. As I mentioned earlier, some employers were mentioning that it was kind of hard to find when it was best to speak to those working in a school. So looking to universities, they've got quite a regular annual timetable for how they work with schools and how people apply. And I think this is really important to then have the kind of same thing for apprenticeships. Also, on the kind of employer side of things, I think it's really important for tracking and monitoring the diversity of the workforce, as Edward's already discussed. And we also have our own employer guide about measuring the diversity of your workforce and improving the diversity. So you can find that on our website. But it's really important to still track all this for apprenticeships as well, to see any gaps in application processes, and then you can use that to inform more targeted outreach programs. And lastly, to be kind of building in processes to track your outreach programs and see how effective they are is really important, not only for you as an organisation, but also to work in the wider sector and with many other apprenticeship organisations to evaluate success and share best practice. So thank you. And on the last slide, I've just popped Catherine's email, who is our apprenticeships manager. She worked with me on this report, but unfortunately can't make it today. So if you have any questions about our apprenticeships programs, please do send them to her. And thank you for your time. And I'll hand back to Edward.
Thank you, Erica. That was some really great insights there. And also, I was just looking at the Q&A while you were delivering your presentation. It's really interesting to see how some of your findings align with some of the questions that have come in. I'm thinking particularly around the difficulty in outreach with schools. And there was a particular question on an attendee's difficulties that they've had. It'll be quite interesting to explore that in the Q&A session later. So thank you. Yeah, so as I said earlier, we've got Sharon from CSEP. So I think Sharon's going to deliver a presentation on some kind of real world insights on how she has developed the programs within CSEP. So I'll hand over to Sharon.
Thank you, Edward. Good morning, everyone. It's great to have the opportunity to talk about some of the work that we have done at Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners, or CCEP, as we prefer to call ourselves, because otherwise it's far too long-winded. So if we can move on to the first slide. I think what's really important is to talk about the fact that we have absolutely been on a journey. So although we are a huge global brand, in GB, we only have just over 3,000 employees. So early careers for us kind of started back in 2014, when we really thought about the fact that, you know, all of our various locations in the UK were going off and undertaking apprenticeships in particularly engineering, or doing some school outreaches, but we didn't really have a joined up approach. And we felt that if we really wanted to get serious about early careers, apprenticeships, and at that point probably social mobility was on the landscape but wasn't as prominent as it is today, we really needed to think about how could we do that in a much more centralized approach. So that's nearly 8 years ago that we started this journey, and the journey isn't over. We continue to evolve and develop each year, each day, when something new maybe comes along, or we talk to our networks. And one of the interesting things back in 2014-15 was that when we were talking to a lot of young people about careers within our organisation and apprenticeships within our organisation, and how easy did they find it to navigate towards our opportunities, the vast majority of those young people at that time said it was really, really difficult. And that's because we didn't even have an early careers page or even an apprenticeship page, which was our primary focus at the time. And so one of the things as an organisation that we've undertaken is to develop, which is the 3 tiles that you can see at the bottom, was to develop an early career space that young people, educators, parents could go and look at and say, well, what is Coca-Cola all about? What are the opportunities? And we broke it down into 3 distinct areas. We talk about work experience, which is very much about our outreach program and what could happen there. Then apprenticeships, let's put case studies on there. Let's talk about the successes that we've had. And what's really important is also, when we talk about it from a social mobility perspective and an EDI perspective, let's have case studies of lots of diverse young people, so that when somebody who's thinking about a career within our organisation, they could see themselves reflected. And that was really, really important for us to be able to do that on our website. And then we have the whole graduate university piece as well. And how do we ensure, again, that we become one of those employers of choice, especially when there are so many job opportunities that are actually out in the marketplace. So we moved from a decentralized to centralized and created a website that allowed a lot of young people to be able to see us. But if we go to the next slide, what you will see is that we wanted to look at how many different entry points could we have, or touch points that could we have within our organisation. How did we also link it to the Gatsby benchmark 5 and 6? How do we get those interactions with a lot of the young people in a lot of the schools? And it was really interesting listening to Edward, listening to Erica, that we've been on a journey with the Sutton Trust, with the Social Mobility Commission, attending webinars like this to help us become really, really informed in terms of shaping our approach. So when we looked at our outreach programs, we absolutely recognised that with actually quite a small workforce, we weren't able to do everything ourselves. So we looked to partner with a number of organisations. Some of them are paid partnerships, so there's a commercial element. Some of them are industry partners. So if I think about 3 probably main partners that we do a lot of work with. So we work with Uptree, which is a small organisation who actually go into a lot of the schools for us and talk about Coca-Cola and the types of careers. And we run an annual application masterclass with them. And they have a real focus on that EDI piece, those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who come from maybe multicultural backgrounds, and also gender. That was really, really important for us to find a partner who could deliver that. We also work with Youth Employment UK, and they are very much the youth voice of the sector. So they helped us to really shape what was our strategy, what were we actually trying to achieve from having an early careers, and how and how did that then work for us from a social mobility perspective, to actually help us to shape that. And then from an industry partner, I think about the IGD. So we're a food organisation. We're food and drink. They're a food organisation, and they too do a lot of outreach in terms of schools, and they have lots and lots of toolkits. And I think one of the things for us there was very much about, okay, we've tapped into that. Not everybody works in food and drink, but there will be industry bodies just like that that probably have the same type of resources that we've been utilising. And then we've worked really hard on our apprenticeship programme. We've centralised it, we've expanded it, and the apprenticeship levy, for all of its challenges that it brought to us, it meant that we opened up even greater opportunities. So whereas before I said we talked very much about engineering, we now have sales, degree apprenticeships, a whole host of apprenticeships. And I've had to, on this slide, make sure I've got my language right, because not only do we operate apprenticeships in England, but we also operate apprenticeships in Scotland, and they will have a different language, a different name. But we've also worked with Skills Development Scotland to help us, as it says, develop our apprenticeships and our offerings in there. But we also absolutely recognise that not everybody wants to join an organisation through an apprenticeship, or have the opportunity to go to degrees, to go to university to gain a degree. So then what are the opportunities? What are the types of roles that we could do as direct entry hires from those from school and college leavers as well? So we've really built our plan and broken it down. And then we have our graduate programme that's in operation. And again, we start to work with universities who do have those from underrepresented groups. And one of the things that we're doing, and this is why I talk very much, it's evolving. So just a couple of months ago, I met a young lady by the name of Sophie Pinder. She's the founder of the 93% Club. So she's going to come in and talk to us a bit more about universities and how that 93% of students at university come from more lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And therefore, how do I work with the 93% Club to be able to build into our social mobility agenda? So it is really about understanding all of the various networks. For those of you who think it's a big organisation and they must have a huge early careers team, I am the only person in early careers, and I have to do a lot of influencing of other colleagues who work in other parts of the business, in our recruitment team, our learning and development team, and each of our locations, to give me some of the resource that they've got to help me drive the whole early careers. It might be a big brand, we just don't have a huge amount of resource. If you're just even a small organisation, it's worthwhile tapping into external networks to see what can they provide to you. But one thing the pandemic did make us really think about was how could we support some of the government schemes, because at that time there were a lot of them about. And on the next slide, what you'll see is we started to move through that non-traditional recruitment. So we took part and are still taking part in the Kickstart scheme. And it, you know, the Kickstart scheme was there to open the doors around those from, you know, are likely to be furthest away from the employment market. And, you know, it helped us to have those internal discussions about how can we go about supporting and helping disadvantaged young people into work, but also, you know, move away from that non-traditional, move to a non-traditional way of recruitment, and not thinking that everybody's going to have so much experience. And what we found, it did have its challenges, that programme, I'm not going to lie. So we did have a third who left before the programme concluded. And for some of those reasons, they just didn't turn up. But we weren't going to let that stop us. We had some who did complete the programme and therefore have left with 6 months worth of work experience on a brand new creative CV, and we hired a third of those. And that's a third of young people who we would not have previously had any interactions. But what it did is it made sure that the door was widened even further to bring more young people in from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And on the next slide, you'll see, and obviously I'm going to not go through it all, but, you know, we had Aaron who joined us. He had some traumatic times, and he came in and he worked with us as part of our recruitment. During that time, he got to see what it was like to work in our organisation and what it was like to be a young person coming in. And he then managed to secure a role within one of our merchandising teams, probably a role that he would never have thought that he could get within our organisation. So Kickstart, for all of its challenges, and I have a number of examples of that, but for Kickstart, for all of its challenges, what it meant was that people became much more receptive to, they've got A levels, at the higher grades, or they've been to university. Actually, no, it's about giving somebody a chance within that. And so when you get the deck, you'll be able to read a little bit more about Aaron's story, but we have a number of these individuals who have gone through. And then on the next slide, Kickstart's concluded for the government, but we didn't want it to conclude for us. So we are now working with the Department of Education to be able to build our traineeship programme. So another way of creating work experience opportunities, but we will also be enhancing it. I think the thing for me with all of the programmes that we've been working on and that we've been creating is that it does need to link to, what our organisational goals are. And by having the traineeship, having Kickstart, having the traineeship, it allows us then to create another pipeline of apprentices coming into our organisation. We all absolutely recognise that there is a challenge in terms of talent and recruitment out in the marketplace. So we're having to be very agile and adaptable in terms of some of the programmes that we absolutely undertake. But as I say, it does all link back to, what is it that we're trying to achieve as an organisation, and how can we widen that participation? And so one final programme that we've actually also undertaken is our Reach Up programme, which is on the next slide, which a colleague of mine started back in the spring of 2018. And that programme has gone from strength to strength. And they have worked with youth employment organisations, in this case, UK youth, to create pilot programmes where they have a number of young people, again, furthest to reach from the marketplace. We've taken our volunteering days to be able to support a lot of the outreach, and we've then expanded that. And this is about building the employability skills for those young people to be able to come into organisations like ours. And what that also has meant for us as an organisation is that we've then created a different talent pipeline to bring young people into some of the roles that, once again, that either we have higher attrition in or we find more challenging to fill. And therefore, it's allowed them to be successful in securing employment not just with us, because I think it's really important for us to be able to say that, but also to give them the skills and the employability skills to work for other organisations as well, not just CCEP. And with a lot of my networks, we talk very much about what's the best practice, what are you doing to be able to support, because we're all trying to, I guess, achieve the same goal around the whole social mobility. And so on my next slide, you know, I've just shown a little bit about the program, what it looks like, how it's worked. When we started it, we were Coca-Cola European partners, but as I say, it's gone strength to strength. So this is maybe just a little bit of a tip. If anybody's thinking about how can we do this, how can we work with organisations, you know, we've got that Reach Up program in UK Youth. And the final slide really just shows just some of what we heard from the young people, and therefore how that has helped us to shape even further, you know, the continuous improvement, because it's just, again, really important for us that we go from strength to strength and we build programs that actually are sustainable, but are also what young people need as well. That's it from me. I think the last slide is a thank you for listening slide, and I will hand back to Edward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you for being quite open and honest there as well. Just thinking about what you mentioned around maybe a few years ago, this wasn't on the agenda as much, so social mobility wasn't that high, but actually particularly over the last couple of years, it's something that's risen to really high up on the agenda. And I was just thinking from a perspective of a lot of other organisations will also be experiencing that. And they'll be at different stages, and you mentioned actually reaching out for support from organisations and how actually to drive that process through your organisation. And also it's really good to hear your reflections on your Kickstart programme and actually some of the challenges you did have with that. Again, thank you for being really open and honest, because other organisations will be experiencing those challenges too. So it's good to hear that and share those reflections. So I think we have got time for Q&A. So bring Sharon and Erica back in. So we'll just see what's been posted. So I'll have a look here. So a question from Michael. How can organisations develop proof points for social mobility work they do? It's a common question from our partner organisations. I'll hand this to Sharon. I think proof points, if it's evidence, I'm guessing, but not 100%. But yeah, how can organisations develop proof points for social mobility work they do?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really, really good question. One of the things that we're currently doing, and when this call concludes today, is that I need to finish the social mobility index that's currently happening. And that actually for us will allow us, when we get that report back, be able to see where we may have gaps. One of the biggest things is always about data. And so we are now capturing data, but we're on a very early journey with that. So that's absolutely a starting point. And when we first did the index, we did it anonymously because we wanted to get a report back that told us how could we focus on what did we need to focus on. I think the other thing from an early careers perspective is a lot of the case studies about the young people that we're bringing in and what they are saying to us about our organisation and what it looks like to be part of our organisation. So those are probably just two small things. Get the case study and be part of the index, because that will absolutely help you.
Brilliant, thank you, Sharon. And can I also co-sign that on the data point? So it's one of our key and critical things. It's about collecting the data, and one of the reasons why collecting the data is so important is because you can then measure how effective your actions and interventions have been, and that is part of the process of learning. So if any interventions that you've taken within your organisation, actually evaluate what was the effectiveness of those interventions, because we don't want you to just plough money or perhaps no money, but still put resource into a programme, but then not evaluate any actions from that. Erica, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this question as well.
Yeah, my thoughts literally echo what you just said about data. So again, would to mention our employer guide and social mobility commissions guide and materials as well, and the importance of measuring things like parental occupation and school type, free school meal eligibility also being an important measure there about tracking the background of the people that are working for you.
Brilliant, thank you. Just go on to the next question. So this one's for Sharon. Now Kickstart is over, how are you going to use what you've learned through your experience into your future early career strategy?
It's a great question. So part of it was the fact that we've now going to transition into the traineeships. So we've taken a lot of the learnings there around, I'll give you a real life example. So one of the young persons who joined Kickstart with us, we moved the barriers in terms of you needed to have a company vehicle or a driving license to do a particular role. In actual fact, he did have a driving license. So it was great for him. On day one, when he turned up, he had asked the question, what should I wear? And the manager had said, wear a pair of black trousers and a polo shirt. And he said, I only have one pair of trousers. Now we just automatically assumed. So we no longer assume on anything like that. We ask the question of, what sizes are you, so we can provide you with your uniform. We've already been paying the travel and allowance expenses for them, but actually what we did is we started to pay it in advance. So it was all of these factors that we've built in to ensure that those individuals could actually come to work and start work on day one without feeling disadvantaged. And we build that now we're building that into the traineeship program. But also we have built it into any recruitment over the last 2 years from an early careers perspective. And my colleagues who do what I call our normal recruitment are also factoring this in around the travel and expenses to just even get to an interview. So it's not even about getting to them, but just even coming to the interview, that we will pay, with reasonable, and we talk about reasonable, their expenses and their travel. So all of these factors that we've learned from Kickstart, we are just baking them into any approach that we take from an early careers. And as I say, that's then rippling through the wider business as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Sharon. And then we just got a question for you, Erica, which just a comment and a question in on just around difficulty in outreach with schools. So you did touch on it in your presentation earlier. And I just, so the actual question, we've tried outreach with schools, but very few of the schools even responded. These were some fantastic opportunities, but we weren't able to engage. I wonder if you could kind of pull out more information on the advice you give in particular.
Yeah, sure. I think I lost your connection slightly there, but I think I've heard what you said. Also, I can think there's a bit of an echo, but hopefully you can hear me okay. So yeah, and I was reading what people were replying to that question as well in the chat actually, and thinking about people like the Careers and Enterprise Company and the careers leaders in schools as well. So those are people that are in schools that are working specifically on opportunities post 16 and post 18, and I think that's a great route into a school if you are struggling to kind of get contacts in a school. So they were people that are working directly in schools, but also the Careers and Enterprise Company have careers hubs which are across areas and involve many schools and employers in a local area. So if you can get a contact there, that's another great way to get into schools near you or across the country.
Can I come in on that as well, Edward, if that's all right?
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Yeah, so we, because Erica, I was going to mention the Careers and Enterprise Company, and we've been working with them probably for the last 3 or 4 years, and we've become a cornerstone employer in for our Nottingham, so the Nottingham Derbyshire area, probably something that we wouldn't have even realised was an opportunity had we not made contact with them. And then we have employer advisors and career advisors who go into the schools as well. And we're looking to expand that out because they're just opening a Cornerstone Employer Hub in London, and that's a massive area for us. But it also takes a bit of pressure off of us trying to get through the school doors, because that was one of the challenges whilst we were working with partners, that if we wanted to approach a school, actually you were moved from pillar to post because nobody was really sure who should be talking to whom. And so I would absolutely echo the Careers and Enterprise Company as another way into schools.
Brilliant. Thank you both for those contributions. So just looking at a question possibly for Sharon, but I just want to see I can take it as well. So someone's put a comment in around I understand that some larger organisations have found it difficult to transfer their levy funds to SMEs, and the SMEs have found it very difficult to use and access these funds. And Sharon, I was just wondering if you had any experience of levy transfer in your organisation, if it's something you do, or if you have any experience with it.
Yeah, no, I am absolutely delighted to say we have got experience, and positive experience of it. So we have done levy transfer as part of Health Education England. Again, so they contacted the National Skills Academy for Food and Drink and came and spoke to us, and we were like, oh, this is really great, because we've been trying to work out how to transfer levy, but also in a positive way, so that we were doing it the right way. But equally, we then had some of our small suppliers, small businesses, who have come along and said to us, well, we've talked to them about apprenticeships, and they've said, well, we just don't really know how to start. Where we've then also done levy transfers through to them as well. I think it's becoming more, it's more accessible. I think there's still a lot of work to do around it, but it is definitely more accessible. And with the changes last year in terms of it's the levy pledge and being able to pledge money, I think that makes it a lot easier for organisations, because initially you had to kind of almost go out and find the company, and that was probably the hardest part to be able to do. But with the levy transfer pledge, it makes it a lot easier, and organisations are crying out to give their levy to other businesses so that it doesn't go back into the department.
Thank you for that, Sharon. Also, just to mention, so I know of a really good scheme that Co-op run, so it's a levy transfer scheme. So if anybody who's interested, do go on Co-op's website and view the scheme. It's for larger organisations that want to give their levy to SMEs in their local area. So yeah, do look at that, because it's a really good scheme. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap up there. But thank you so much, Sharon and Erica, for sharing both your work, but also some of the questions, because it's really good to get some of that insight, and it's really valuable for others to hear that. So just to say, thank you for everybody for attending today's session. So I hope you've found it useful and insightful. So yeah, just last thing, do encourage all employers to review some of the toolkits on our website, and also, as we have Such and Trust here, do review some of their information that they have on their website too. But it's not just on apprenticeships, as Erica mentioned, there's more information there for employers. So just moving on to the next slide, just looking at our next session. So yeah, our next session, data's come up a lot in this. The next session will be on data, so what, why, and how. So that's scheduled for the 28th of June. So please do look out for those invitations in your inbox. And just moving on to the last slide, finally, I just wanted to make a plug. So Social Mobility Awareness Day, it's actually the first one, takes place on the 16th of June this year. So it's created by Making the Leap. So it's all about promoting wider conversations about social mobility, and to celebrate organisations committed to bringing socioeconomic diversity and positive change to their organisations. So for the first year, it's going to focus on what is social mobility. So if you do want to find out any further information, please go and visit the website and also there'll be more information from us shortly. But yes, thank you everybody for joining today's webinar, and a special thanks to Sharon and Erica. That was brilliant.